You can finally experience Destiny 2 on PC with the beta that hit our gaming rigs. But do you know how your system's gonna handle it? Established fans of the franchise and those who wanted the game to come to PC should be hyped up. The game runs extremely well, even on modest systems. I'm running an Intel Core i5-3570K CPU, an MSI GTX 970 slightly overclocked, and 8GB of DDR3 RAM, which falls pretty much in line with what Bungie and Activision states as the recommended system specs for Destiny 2. But what does that translate to? What could we actually get out of these specs? But before we move on, make sure you're subscribed to GameSpot for more game tech. First, let's take a look at our options in the graphics menu. Bungie didn't skimp out on the PC version. As promised, we have the option for an uncapped frame rate. There's also an option to lock it at 60 FPS or even 30 FPS, but there really isn't any reason to do this. One of the most important and sometimes overlooked options in shooters is field of view, or FOV. It's essentially how wide your viewing angle is of the game environment. The higher it is, the more you can see in your peripheral vision. It's a competitive advantage since you'll see more of what's going on at any given moment. So crank that coveted FOV slider up somewhere between 95 and 105, though personally, I go with the max at 105. Now let's dig into actual visual effects. To get rid of jaggies, we effectively have 4 anti-aliasing options: FXAA, SMAA, MSAA, and super sampling. FXAA tends to make the game look a little too blurry, so I'd opt for SMAA since it strikes a nice balance between performance and quality, while the better looking MSAA tax my machine too much. With all our settings cranked up at 1080p, our quick little test in the opening area showed a frame rate around the high 60s to the high 70s with SMAA. With MSAA, the frame rate dipped around the low to mid 40s. It's not worth the 30 or so FPS trade-off with my modest system, but note that this is still a beta, and Bungie said that MSAA is still being optimized. Resolution scale is synonymous with super sampling. You force your machine to produce a higher resolution image and downscale it to fit your display's proper resolution. It's the most effective form of anti-aliasing, but it's also the most demanding. At 133%, essentially 1440p, the frame rate dipped to about the mid-40s. Another big hitter in the graphics settings is ambient occlusion, which is a process of darkening objects that should be blocked by light sources, creating a sort of fake shadow that adds richness and depth to the scene. There are 2 options, HDAO and 3D. As for performance, with everything maxed out including MSAA, the difference between HDAO and 3D was around 5 frames per second in the same test scene. We're unclear as to exactly what the 3D setting is, but if I had to guess, it's something similar to the advanced VXAO. I saw a few more objects in the game world with better shadowing, but I felt I had to really look hard for it. So I'd opt for the extra FPS with HDAO. When we turned ambient occlusion completely off, we got 3 to 5 extra FPS, but the overall image looked flatter, so I find HDAO worth it. Anisotropic filtering is labeled as texture anisotropy. This setting cleans up the quality of textures off in the distance and surfaces that are seen at an oblique angle. It's one of the more visually impactful effects that doesn't ask too much from your hardware. I'd suggest cranking this up to 16x since the performance hit, if any, is negligible. It's like a free bump in visual quality. Many of the other settings are quite self-explanatory, such as quality of textures, shadows, or the distance at which certain things like character models and foliage keep their quality. Chromatic aberration and film grain don't really have a performance impact and are more about personal preference. When it was all said and done, I settled with 1080p, SMAA, HDAO, 16x texture filtering, and all the quality settings set to the highest. Through my several hours in multiplayer matches, the game ran consistently above 60 frames per second, bouncing between the mid-70s to the mid-90s. Only in the most frantic moments did I notice the frame rate dip to the high 50s, but that's negligible. You shouldn't expect to run the game at 4K at the recommended specs, but we gave it a shot anyway. We turned off anti-aliasing, used HDAO, turned all the quality settings to high, but shadows to medium. The results were between the mid-20s to the mid-30s, which is undesirable given that it's a disadvantage for a competitive PC game where everyone else is likely getting upwards of 60 frames per second. 4K is reserved for those equipped with a GTX 1070 or an RX Vega 56 at the very least, but you probably want a GTX 1080, 1080 Ti, or RX Vega 64 to do 4K comfortably. Overall, the PC version of Destiny 2 is shaping up to be a great version of the game. It runs fast with high graphics settings even on modest hardware. On top of that, Bungie is giving us an uncapped frame rate, an FOV slider, and even a built-in FPS counter. Keep in mind that this is still a beta. Options we see here could change by the time of the final release, and future drivers and updates can improve performance metrics. There's so much more I could talk about with graphics settings alone, but I want to throw the discussion to you. Are you excited for Destiny 2? Which platform will you be playing on? If you want a deeper dive into the options we talked about here, check out our explainer videos on PC graphics settings like anti-aliasing or ambient occlusion. Subscribe for more stuff like this, and like this video if you found it insightful. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.